The colonel's voice cracked with disbelief as his eyes fixed on the weapon in her hand. The gold-plated Desert Eagle caught the harsh midday light pouring through the tall windows, sending a gleam across the sterile room. His words came out like a verdict, cold and absolute. Civilians were not to be armed on base. Yet here she sat unmoving, her blue eyes steady as glaciers, her posture unyielding. Around them, soldiers shifted in place, caught between training and instinct, their fingers resting on the cool metal of their rifles. The air was thick enough to taste, a blend of polish, gun oil, and the faint tang of tension that made even breathing feel like a risk. She didn't speak. She never did when the stakes were highest. Her silence pressed against the walls like an invisible force, more suffocating than any shouted defense. It wasn't the silence of someone caught or shamed. It was the silence of someone who had already lived through worse than this room could hold. Her hand didn't tremble. She didn't avert her gaze. The golden pistol wasn't raised in defiance, nor hidden in fear. It simply rested in her grip, like an old friend waiting for its moment. The colonel's shock wasn't just at the weapon's presence. It was recognition. His mind clawed at the memory, a dusty reel of half-forgotten images, a war zone, a night lit by tracer fire, the chaos of retreat, and a woman's voice on the radio calling coordinates with unflinching precision. She had been there, and the weapon, this exact weapon, had been there too, gleaming even under a sky that spat death. Her name was Harper Lane, though few here knew it. The base roster had her listed as civilian contractor, a term that erased the years she had worn the uniform. She had once been a military medic in the thickest heat of combat, stitching life back into torn bodies while shells pounded the earth nearby. The gold Desert Eagle was not a trophy. It was a promise. It had belonged to her commanding officer, a man who never made it back from their last mission. She had carried it out of the firestorm, because leaving it behind had felt like leaving him behind. When she returned stateside, the war hadn't followed her home. It had stayed inside her. The weight of the weapon in her hand was as familiar as the ache in her shoulder from the shrapnel that still lived there. She had tried to live quietly, working in logistics, avoiding the kind of places that reeked of power plays and political posturing. But today had not given her that choice. She had been called in for a security clearance renewal, nothing more. She had walked in with her bag, the pistol secured within, the same way she always carried it. She didn't flaunt it, but she never left it. And when the scanner had flagged it, the room had gone still. The colonel had made his declaration in front of everyone. It wasn't just a rule he was quoting. It was the weight of the system, the certainty of hierarchy. And for a moment, the others in the room, soldiers in neatly pressed uniforms, had let the silence swell without interference. Some didn't know her. Others perhaps did, but chose to watch, letting the tension stretch like a wire about to snap. Harper sat unmoved. Her stillness was a refusal, not of the law but of the humiliation laced into its delivery. She had been told before that her service didn't entitle her to anything anymore, that the medals tucked away in a box at home were nothing but history, that her war was over and the world didn't owe her space for its memory. But they were wrong. Her war wasn't over. It was simply quiet now, a low hum under her skin. The colonel stepped forward, intending to demand her compliance. But as he drew closer, his eyes caught on the engraving near the weapon's trigger guard. A name, a rank, a date. His breath stalled. He knew that name. Everyone in the old regiments knew it. That officer had been a legend, and his death had been the kind of loss people didn't speak of without lowering their voices. The colonel's own chest tightened as he remembered the day the news had reached them. He had not been there, but he had read the report. The mission had been impossible. Survival had been unlikely, and yet she had walked out. Her hand tightened slightly, not in warning but in memory. She could still see her commander's face, hear the way he had spoken to her over the roar of chaos. He had told her to take it, said she'd know when to use it. She hadn't drawn it since the day she'd left the desert, but carrying it was enough. It was her anchor, her reminder, her refusal to let the past dissolve into polite forgetfulness. The soldiers on either side of the room shifted again. One of them, barely older than 19, kept glancing between Harper and the colonel, confusion in his eyes. The older sergeant at his side seemed to recognize something, though he kept his jaw locked. And then, without a word, the sergeant stepped forward, took his rifle off ready position, and placed it flat against the wall. His eyes met Harper's for a fleeting second. An unspoken acknowledgement, soldier to soldier. It was the smallest crack in the authorities' wall, but it was enough. The colonel straightened, his expression tightening into something unreadable. He could order her disarmed, humiliate her further, drag her from the room under the weight of regulations. But the inscription on that weapon was carved into him now, a reminder of debts unpaid. And for the first time in years, he felt the sting of knowing that some rules weren't built for justice. Harper finally spoke, her voice low, steady, and carrying more weight than any raised tone could. She said only that she carried it because some promises should never be set down. The room seemed to breathe differently after that. No one moved to stop her as she placed the pistol back into her bag, zipped it shut, and sat back in her chair. Her gaze didn't linger on the colonel. It passed over him like a tide receding from shore. In the days that followed, word spread quietly through the base. Some spoke of the woman with the gold Desert Eagle like she was a ghost from the old wars. Others like she was a living warning. The truth was simpler. She was a reminder that dignity didn't ask for permission. When Harper left that day, she didn't look back. Outside, the sun was bright, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass. The young soldier who had watched her so intently earlier stood at the gate, and as she passed, he straightened to attention without being told. It wasn't protocol. It was respect. There was respect, and in his silent salute, Harper saw the only justice she had ever really wanted. Some stories don't end with applause or ceremony. They end with a quiet shift in the way people stand, the way they see each other. And for those who understand, that's more than enough.